warm welcome to all of you in my live teaching learning session. I am Ria Pramatak. So I discuss you with all about Introduction to Political Theory and the subject code is BPSC 131. So let's move forward. Today I will be discussing about two units, that is unit 11, which talks about democracy versus economic growth. In this chapter or this unit we will be learning about democracy and economic growth in detail. In unit 12 we will be talking about liberty versus censorship. Both these units are very important for this subject. So we will be discussing these two units today in our live lecture. So moving forward, let's see what will be discussing today in our lecture, the contents. So in unit 11, which talks about democracy versus economic growth, we will be first looking at the concept of democracy, advantages of democracy, development of democracy, and core features of liberal democracy. Apart from this, in part economic growth, we will be seeing what does economic growth mean. So apart from that, we will be learning about the democracy and economic growth. As per some scholars are considered to be not compatible with each other, whereas we will be seeing the opposite reaction, that is democracy and economic growth are compatible. So we will be looking at these contents in our first unit. In second unit, that is unit 12, liberty versus censorship, we will be talking about introduction, meaning of liberty, J.S. Mill on liberty, censorship, the concept, and the relationship between liberty and censorship. So these are the main headings and topics which we will be discussing in today's session. So let's move forward. Let's start with unit 11, that is democracy versus economic growth. So democracy and economic growth meaning. So in this part we will be seeing what does democracy mean and what is the concept of democracy. So the concept of democracy is more than 2500 years old, having first appeared in Athens in the 5th century BC. So democracy, if we talk about the origination and evolution of democracy, we can say that it originated more than 2500 years back, and the place where it originated was Athens, which is a Greek city state. It lies in Greece. So we can say that the emergence of democracy started from Athens, which was a Greek city state, in the 5th century BC. So the word democracy is of Greek origin, as we all know, because it originated from there, and it derived from the word demokratia. So the word democracy, which we know nowadays as an English word democracy, it originated from a Greek word demokratia. So this word, it is a combination of two Greek words, that is demos, which means people, whereas kratos mean power. So democratia together is people's power. So we can say like that. So this is the words from which the word democracy arises. Hence, the democracy stands for rule by the people, which gives true legitimacy to the government. So in democracy, we can see that there is no hereditary ruler or there is no monarchy. So the difference between a monarchy and a democracy is that in monarchy, the leader who leads the area or leads the country or leads the state belongs to a particular family, and he got that power to rule inheritance. So in democracy, we can say that we elect people in every 5 or 6 years. It depends, it varies. The time period, the tenure varies from country to country. So in democracy, there is no person or family or dynasty which rules. That happens in monarchy. But in democracy, people choose their own ruler, and it gives true legitimacy to the government, because the government formed after getting elected from people, the citizens of the country, it gets some kind of legitimacy. And we can say that it is the true legitimacy which these governments have. So, although there is a general agreement on the meaning of democracy, yet there are differences on how to implement it. So, if we try to define democracy, we can see that it is general agreement between people who define democracy in a particular way, but there is many differences on how to implement democracy in a state. So there are different types of democracy, such as direct, representative, and deliberative, and etc. There are more such kinds of democracy which we done in our previous lectures in detail. So, to tell you all briefly, direct democracy is the democracy where people directly elect their leader. Whereas in a representative democracy, we elect people who further elect a leader. So in India, we have representative democracy, and to understand this representative democracy, we can take example from India. So in India, when it is Lok Sabha's election, what we do, we elect MPs, members of parliament, who further choose their leader from majority party chooses the leader, and he or she became the prime minister. So we are not directly electing the prime minister, but through members of parliament. So we are choosing our representative who is representing our views, our opinions, and in return they are choosing a leader from our side. So that is representative democracy. Whereas in deliberative democracy, there is a very active participation of citizens who deliberate on issues and in decisions making. So there is a consensus on the idea that democracy means popular rule and sovereignty. So we can say that because people chooses their leader, people choose the political party, so we can say that democracy is a popular rule, and sovereignty is also important for a democracy. So to discuss briefly about sovereignty, we can say that a country or a state where the leader is not influenced, or the decisions taken by the government is not influenced by any external factor, in that case we can say that the country is a sovereign country. So for example, if we take example of India, during British rule, when India was not independent, at that point of time, all our decisions were taken by someone else from outside and not by the inhabitants of this country. So we can say that during British rule, because our decisions, our policies, everything which is related to international affairs and all were taken by an external factor, that was British, the British government. So in that case, we were not sovereign. But after independence, so post 1947, India became a sovereign, because from that point onwards, all the decisions regarding India are taken by the Indians only. So this is about sovereignty. So now let's move forward to advantages of democracy. So there are many advantages. So the first is it prevents the rule of the oppressors, foster human development. So to move forward slowly, we can say that in democracy, the oppressive attitudes are prevented. The oppressive attitudes of a leader or a group or a government are prevented, because here people chooses a person, and after the completion of the tenure or even before the tenure is complete, we can change the government. So that power lies with people. So it prevents the rule of the oppressors. Along with that, it fosters human development. Also, it facilitates protection of individual rights and freedoms and could prevent wars at the international level, as democracies normally do not fight against each other. So, according to a theory, it is said that if a country is democratic, then there is a very less chance that that country, that democratic country, will lead a war or will involve in a war. Because it is believed that in a democracy where individuals are given rights and freedoms, people uh, ask or people want their government to perform in a particular way. So there is an accountability of the government towards its citizens, and it is seen that democracies normally do not fight against each other. So, according to J.S. Mill, John Stuart Mill, he's a very big political thinker and very important political thinker. He has given three advantages of democratic decision making over non democratic ones. So, he compared democratic decision making and non democratic one. So, the first is strategically, democracy compels decision makers to take into account interests, opinion, and rights of most of the people, which would not be the case in an authoritarian or aristocratic form of government. So, in a democracy, the decision makers, the policy makers, the leaders are compelled to take into account the interests, opinion, and rights of the people, because it is the people who are electing them, and in return to that, it is the compulsion of a leader to listen to its citizens who are voting for him or her. So we can say that in comparison to authoritarian and aristocratic form of government, in democracy, people are heard. So the second point which J.S. Mill talks about is that democracy brings in a number of varied views in the process, which allows decision makers to pick up the best ideas. So, because in a democracy, a person is allowed or a person enjoys freedom of expression, rights, and all these kinds of things which develop him, we can say that it allows the person to come forward with various views. So, in a country like India, where there are so many diversity, languages, so many regions, geographical regions, in that we can say that when a decision is going to make, the leaders are going to make a decisions. So because people are allowed to speak their opinion, speak their mind, so they can have various views coming from people, and in that process it allows the decision makers to pick up the best ideas among all of these. So the third one which J.S. Mill talks about is that democracy also helps in character building of citizens, as it inculcates qualities like rationality, autonomy, and independent thinking. So it not only helps a government to run properly, but democracy also develops a person's character. It builds the character of a citizens, because it is believed that a person is rational, he is autonomous, and he has independent thinking. So these are the advantages of democracy which J.S. Mills talks about. So now we can see that how democracy developed over times. So the idea of democracy has come a long way from its initial form in Greece, which was not inclusive in nature. So we know democracy is very inclusive, where people are not discriminated over their race, caste, gender, and class. But we should understand this, that the earlier form of democracy, which was founded in Greece, was not inclusive, which like nowadays, because at that point of time democracy was different and it evolved over time. So in this period, the in history in historical process, the democracy also evolved from Greece model to nowadays the current form. So in the Greek model of democracy, it excluded women, slaves, and immigrants, making it undemocratic in spirit. So as we know democracy, it is for all. Okay, but in Greek model of democracy, the democracy was not for everyone. It was for free propertied men. So the men who were free and who has land with them were given these democratic rights, whereas women, slaves, and immigrants were not allowed to participate in political processes. It was believed that slaves, women, and immigrants are not capable enough to participate in politics. So it was seen as only a men's affair, and democracy was only limited to them, propertied class, free men. So, this spirit continued even in modern democracies like France, Britain, and the US, where some sections were not allowed to vote while voting rights were given to wealthy men. So, with time, we say that it evolved, but in many countries like France, Britain, and US, for a very long time, these rights were excluded from the women, slaves, and all, and it was only given, the voting right was only given to the wealthy men. So there was a class discrimination, there was gender discrimination. So we can say that through a very long time, France, Britain, and US were also having a democracy just like the Greek democracy, which was undemocratic in spirit. The French Revolution of 1789 talked about liberty, equality, and fraternity apart from popular sovereignty of mankind. So, in politics, French Revolution plays a very important role because from this revolution we can see that many new concepts and many new issues arised in our politics. So, however, women did not get voting right, and it was only in 1944 that France started universal adult franchise or universal adult suffrage. So, even though because of French Revolution, many new concepts like equality, fraternity, all these things arrived, but it was only in 1944 that France allowed voting rights to women and started universal adult suffrage. So, by universal adult suffrage, we mean to say that it is for each and everyone from a certain age group. For example, in India, the age group which for voting is 18 years. So, it varies from place to place, countries to countries. But universal adult suffrage means every adult universally is allowed to vote. So, without any discrimination, caste, class, gender, race, ethnicity, and geographical location, people are given voting rights. So, that is called universal adult suffrage. In Britain, women got the right to vote in 1928, while in the US, they got this right in 1920. So we can see that from ancient time, from 5th century BC till 1920s or the early 20th century, women were not given voting rights. So it was in the 20th century, the starting of this 20th century, we can see that the women were also included into the political arena. However, discrimination on the basis of color remained in the US, and it was only in 1965 that the African American women and males were given the right to vote. So as we can see that there was a discrimination between gender, class, caste, and all these things. But in US, we can say that there was a discrimination on the basis of color, race. So why? Because Africans and Americans, black and white, there was a discrimination because of the skin color. And it was only in 1965 that African American males and females were given right to vote. India has been progressive in this regard compared to Western democracy as it adopted universal adult franchise from 1950 when its constitution came into force. So, since its inception, Indian constitution framers were sure that there will be universal adult franchise in India because uh, they went to foreign countries, they went to for higher studies for, and they saw that in those Western countries women were given rights, and they were sure that when India will get independence, that will be one of the major decision that should be taken, that irrespective of education qualification, caste, class, gender, language, religion, all the citizens of India will be getting universal adult franchise, and it was started from the starting of the constitution or inception of the constitution in the year 1950. So India became the world's first democratic state to have universal adult franchise since inception. So as we were talking about US, France and all, so they were a state from a very long time, but they allowed universal adult franchise very late, whereas since the day of getting independence, India was sure that they will be providing universal adult franchise to all its citizens. Saudi Arabia is the latest country which has allowed women to vote, and in 2015. So we can say that the Arabian countries, the Middle Eastern countries were very late in this regard because they allowed women to vote in recent past in 2015. So let's move forward. So, democracy has two different views, that is, procedural democracy, which is also known as minimalist democracy, and substantive democracy, which is also known as maximalist democracy. So, according to procedural dimension or procedural democracy, it focuses on procedures or means in place to attain democracy. So, procedural dimension argues that regular competitive elections on the basis of universal adult franchise and plural political participation would produce a democratically elected government. So it talks about the procedure of voting, procedure of electing a government, and if we provide universal adult franchise and if there is plural political participation of the citizens, then it will automatically produce a democratically elected government. Whereas, on the other hand, the substantive democracy tries to overcome the shortcomings of the procedural view, which argues that social and economic differences could hamper people's participation in the democratic process. So, to understand it better, in procedural democracy, they only talks about the participation of people, so it will produce a democratic government. But substantive democracy says that the social and economic differences could hamper the participation of people into politics and into democratic processes. So if we take example from India, we can say that because of caste and class differences between people, few peoples are not allowed to participate politically, or they are not allowed to say their words and express their opinions. So in that case, we can say that substantive democracy want to reduce it. So substantive democracy focuses on outcomes like social equality instead of ends in order to truly work for the government. So they want social equality, which will allow the person who is marginalized to come forward and participate in government procedures as same as another person. So the term democracy is generally used to denote liberal democracy, which implies a representative government in which the ability of the elected representative to exercise decision-making power is subject to the rule of law. So basically, if we talk about democracy, we talk about liberal democracy, where there will be representative government and they will be participating in decision making, and there must be rule of law where each and every person will be equal in front of law. So its liberal characters are reflected in a network of internal and external checks upon government that are designed to guarantee liberty and afford citizens protection against the state. So its democratic features are based upon a system of regular and competitive elections. So for a democracy to run properly, it is very important that the election must happen in regular basis. So if there is no regularity, then there will be a threat to democracy. So regular and competitive elections are very important for a democracy to sustain. So its democratic features are based upon a system of regular and competitive elections conducted on the basis of universal adult franchise and political equality. So for that, for competitive elections to be based on free and fair basis, it is very important that there must be universal adult franchise. So universally people will get equal right to vote and participation, right to participate in political procedures, and also there must be political equality. So let's move forward to the core features of liberal democracy. The first is constitutional government based upon formal, usually legal rules. So there must be codified laws or codified rules which must be there. So it is based on legal rules. It guarantees civil liberties and individual rights by the constitution. So in a liberal democracy, there must be civil liberties and individual rights which will be ensured by the constitution of the country. There is institutional framework and a system of checks and balances so that the accountability should be maintained. There must be regular elections respecting the principle of universal adult suffrage and one person, one vote. This is something which we should know better. One person, one vote. So many times it was seen that because of a person's educational background, for example, if there is person A who is educated and a person B who is illiterate. So it was seen that many times it happened that the educated person's vote will count two, whereas because the person is illiterate and he has no education qualification, for that the person will be given only one vote. So there will be weightage of two votes for an educational person or educated person and only one vote for an illiterate. So this is very discriminatory in nature. So there is very importance given to this that a person, whether he is educated or not, where he is literate or not, should count, his or her vote should count one as like all other persons. So apart from this, there is political pluralism in the form of electoral choice and a party competition. So there must be parties which compete with each other. This will flourish democracy. There must be a healthy civil society in which organized groups and interests enjoy independence from government, whereas a capitalist or a private enterprise economy organized along market lines. So these were the core features of liberal democracy. Now come to economic growth. So economic growth is the process by which a nation's wealth increase over time. So as we know, what does growth mean? It means increase. So it is about the increase of nation's wealth over time. In hardcore economic terms, it is increase in the market value of goods and services produced in an economy over a period of time. So there is also a difference between economic growth and economic development. So development brings people out of low standard of living and provides them with employment and shelter. So with the word development, we can see there must be a positive connotation to this. So it also takes into account the issue of sustainability, meeting the needs of the present without compromising needs of the future generation. To understand sustainability, we can take example of our environment. So for this generation, if we ruin the natural resources and the environment, then the upcoming generation will be lacking all these natural resources. For example, if we use or if we pollute the water, then the upcoming generation will not be able to get the resources which we got from our previous generation. So sustainability means meeting the needs of the present without compromising needs of future generations. So development talks about sustainability. Whereas economic growth, on the other hand, may cause issues of pollution and congestion without addressing issues of sustainability. So this is a very huge distinction between economic growth and economic development. So in development, we take care of our future generation, that they must also enjoy all those natural resources which we are enjoying in present times. Whereas the concept of economic growth doesn't like, they don't think about future generations. They live in present, so they utilize as much as natural resources as they can, because they want to grow. So they can cause issues of pollution and congestion, and they don't talk about sustainability. So some factors that affect economic growth are explained in the next slide. So the first is natural resources. The amount of natural resources a country has will determine its economic growth prospects as well. So it is very important for a country to have natural resources. Otherwise, the country needs to depend on others. So India, if we take example of India, India is very rich because of its natural resources. Not only we have minerals, but many such things which other countries lacks. So this is also one of the reason why India faced so many colonizations, because India was very rich because of its natural resources. So, for example, countries in West Asia have large reserves of oil. By selling this commodity, their economic growth has accelerated. So, as we know that in West Asia there are deserts, there is very few rivers flown over there, but they have oil reserves. And because of oil, which is very important for each and every country, irrespective of their geographical locations, so after selling oil, they did their economic growth. They grew economically. The next come is infrastructure. Basic physical and organizational structures and facilities augment economic growth. So, moving goods from one place to another in a country, well connected by roads and railways, will be cheap and easy than in a country that does not have good connectivity. So, connectivity by roads, railways, and waterways is very important for a country to flourish. Why? Because if we take certain amount of a large amount of time just to reach a place, so it will be very harmful for the economy. And that is the reason why we are growing our infrastructure in our country India, because it will reduce the time, and as a result of which we will grow economically. Next comes labor. Availability of labor is both a challenge and opportunity. Higher workforce help in economic growth, but it needs to be skilled as well. So, uh, if we have workforce, but it will be not much helpful, because if they don't know the skills to do that work, to operate a machine or to do that work properly, then it will be a challenge for the company which is hiring them. So next comes technology. It increases productivity and lowered cost. So because of technology, many things happens which are becoming cheap. Why? Because we don't need to require spend lot of money in commuting or in going there or in paperwork. So next comes political stability. There will be flight of capital from a country that lacks political stability, and investors will not put their money in an economy that lacks political direction. So in a country like a war-torn country or a country where there is no development, people don't want to invest in those countries, because political stability is very important. Because if person is investing in a project overseas, so if their problem arises, he has to withdraw the company or withdraw the factory from there, uh, which will be a loss for that company. So in that case, political stability is very important. So, democracy, economic growth, and development have had a strong correlative and interactive relationship throughout history. So, the relationship between political democracy and economic growth has been at the center of debate in the past 50 years. So, there is a relationship, as we know, between political democracy and economic growth, but it is a matter of debate. So, first in the 1950s and 1960s, the debate was on the question of the underdeveloped countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We should remember that these three continents were the one who were colonized by the Western countries. So, in this time period, in 1950s and 60s, many these countries from Asia, Africa, and Latin America got independence, and that's why the debate also increased. So, after getting independence from colonial rule, these countries made in their primary objective to make their system democratic. So each and every country who got independence wanted to have a democratic form of government, because according to them they were leading a very tough life under colonial rule, and because now they are getting rid of that colonial rule and their restrictions, now they want a country where their will be listened or heard. So soon a majority of them turned into a dictatorship, whether it was Pakistan, Myanmar, Indonesia, Cuba, etc. So they initially wanted democracy, but ultimately few countries they turned into a dictatorship or a military rule. And the examples are Pakistan, Myanmar, Indonesia, Cuba, etc. So the exigencies of growth and survival compelled them to quell all political oppositions and denial of civil and political liberties to their citizens. So, as we read in our previous slides, that there is a difference between an authoritarian and aristocratic rule with democracy. So, the moment democracy was turned into an authoritarian dictatorship, at that point of time, all the liberties provided to the citizens of the country were taken back. So, this raised a fundamental question: what comes first, democracy or growth? So, this is the main part of this unit. So, there is a question: what comes first, democracy or growth? What should be given preference, giving civil political liberty and rights, democratic freedom, or removing poverty, illiteracy, and misery of the people? So, this is a matter of concern. So, according to few scholars, they say that democracy and economic growth are not compatible. So, let's see what are their points which they are talking about. So, there are some experts who believe that democracy may not be good for economic growth. So, according to Robert Barrows, more political rights do not have an effect on growth. The first lesson is that democracy is not the key to economic growth. So, according to Robert Barrow, democracy is not the key to economic growth. So, if we have democracy or not, it doesn't matter. Whereas, according to Judge Poshner, dictatorship will often be optimal for very poor countries. Such countries tend not only to have simple economies but also lack the cultural and institutional preconditions for a democracy. So, according to Judge Poshner, he says that because the newly independent country are so poor and the people were not developed enough because of their poor conditions due to colonization, so there is no preconditions for a democracy to work there. So, both democracy and non-democracy can have beneficial or harmful effects on economic development. As per the experts who talks about democracy and economic growth are not compatible. So, both democracy and non-democracy can have beneficial or harmful effects on economic development. Three kinds of sustainability they talk about. So, the three kinds of stability are ownership stability, that is the stable system of property rights; legal stability, rule of law; and social stability, lack of social unrest, are among the most necessary conditions for economic development, though not sufficient conditions. So, these stabilities are very much important. So, the conditions may be present either in a democracy or non democracy and could aid economic development. So, even economic development can have an impact on democracy or an authoritarian state. economic hardships can bring down any government. So they argue that whether it's a democratic or authoritarian state, if a person or if a country is not economically well or not economically performing well and there are economic hardships, it will bring down the government because there will be unrest among the population. So, the one argument, mainly in the context of East Asian nations, has developed privileging economic growth ahead of democracy. So, there are many countries who prefer economic growth as compared to democracy. So, there are many examples like Singapore, post reform China, and Taiwan have been able to achieve high development levels than some democracies like India. So, we can say that there are many countries who are preferring economic growth over democracy and they are performing very well, more than democracies, big democracies like India. It is called Lee hypothesis as it was developed by the former Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew. So it is known as Lee hypothesis. So this school believes that political and civil rights come later while economic rights come first. So for them, economic rights are more important than civil and political rights. Supporters of Lee thesis give more importance to efficiency and stability than transparency and accountability. So this is the difference, that they want efficiency and stability rather than transparency and accountability. For them, efficiency and stability comes first. So now see what experts talks about the compatibleness between democracy and economic growth. It is believed that unlike the authoritarian regimes, democracy creates better opportunities for both economic growth and cultural progress. So they are supporting democracy and economic growth and say that they are compatible with each other. So democratic regimes are more effective, as per them, at producing a wide distribution of benefits. So democracy allows people to allows the government to distribute the resources and the benefits among its citizens. Democratic governments are also less prone to corruption and rent seeking. They are less predatory. So because there is democracy, people are electing people, and if the person is wrong, the people will overthrow them. So in that case, there is less chances of corruption in the country. According to Milton Friedman, he believed that a higher degree of rights are conducive to economic development. Other studies suggest that democracy promotes economic liberalization, and in the long term, democracy leads to sustainable growth. So, according to this perspective, democracy is beneficial in economic development and growth. Nobel laureate Amartya Sen has argued that democracy is a precondition for economic growth. So, according to Amartya Sen, who is from India, he also believes that democracy is a precondition for economic growth. So, let's move forward to Unit 12, that is liberty versus censorship. So, to understand it better, let's introduce the concept. So, freedom is regarded by many as the preeminent political value, and from the very beginning, both man and the state have been making efforts for the security of their share of freedom. So now let's move forward and let's talk about liberty and censorship, which is Unit 12. So freedom, regarded by many as the preeminent political value, and from the very beginning, both man and the state have been making efforts for the security of their share of freedom. So freedom is very necessary for a country to move or to run properly. So freedom is considered to be an essential condition without which neither state nor individuals can make any progress. So to proceed in life, to develop themselves, there is a very dire need of providing freedom to the citizens. So liberty of the individual is important, and unprecedented legal protection should be provided by the state for overall development. So liberty is very important for an individual to move forward. But there is a wide contention among political scientists, lawyers, political leaders, and citizens about the meaning of the concept of liberty itself and how liberty is acceptable in an ordered state. So there is a debate. So the state regards censorship as a tool to protect the interest and in some cases dignity of the individuals from misleading, false, traitor, hate speech. It is believed that reasonable restrictions are important for the maintenance of social order in a democracy. So there is a need to provide freedom, but there must be, the states believe that there must be some kinds of reasonable restrictions to maintain the social order in a democracy. There are scholars who argue that censorship has been evolved by the state to hamper individual freedom and is used by it for the maintenance of power. So, there are many scholars who go against this, and they said that the censorship is evolved by the state to interfere or to hamper individual freedom, which ultimately be used for the gain of maintenance of power. So, censorship is found in various degrees in all political cultures, and its sources can be political, social, legal, cultural as well. So, we can say that there are many kinds of censorships, and each and every countries have some kind or the other degrees of censorship. So, the question arises here that how much power does the state legitimately hold to use censorship in order to act in public good, and how to distinguish between those restrictions which are used for regressive purposes and those which are legally acceptable. So there is a question. So, to understand this and to understand liberty and censorship, let's start with the meaning of liberty. So, the concept of liberty is complex and has acquired different meanings at different times. So, liberty's meaning changes over time. So, it is often used interchangeably with the term freedom, and both are regarded as synonymous with each other. So, people use liberty and freedom, and they use these two words interchangeably. The term liberty has been derived from the Latin word liber, which means absence of all restraints. So, the exact meaning of liberty, the word liberty, which takes from a Latin word that is liber, it says that absence of all restraints. In this sense, liberty means one has the right to exercise his choice without being subject to any external constraint. So, if a person is not interfered or intervened by an external constraint, we can say that he has liberty. So, according to G.D.H. Cole, he rightly explained that the concept of liberty as the freedom of the individual to express without external hindrances to personality. According to Cole, he defined liberty as the freedom of the individual to express without external hindrances to personality. So, according to Gandhi, let's see what Mahatma Gandhi has told about liberty. According to him, liberty does not mean the absence of restraint, but it lies in the development of personality. So, according to Gandhi, liberty doesn't mean there is some kind of absence of restraints, but for him, it is the development of personality. So, definitions make it clear that liberty is freedom with certain limitations. But after learning all these definitions and talking about liberty, we can say that liberty is a freedom with certain limitations as well. So, according to Isaiah Berlin, he wrote a famous essay that is Two Concepts of Liberty. He made distinction between positive liberty and negative liberty. And this distinction is made on the basis of the role of the state. So, according to Isaiah Berlin, negative liberty implies freedom from undue interference of the state. It implies an area in which the individual is free to do what he or she likes without being obstructed by others. So, if a person is allowed to do whatever he wants to do, at that point of time, we can say that if he is not restricted and obstructed by others, so in that case, we can say that the person is free or the person has liberty. So, this is the negative liberty which Isaiah Berlin talks about. Now, let's talk about positive liberty. So, it implies freedom of rational self. It is about being in controls of one's life. So, we can say that positive liberty is positive because it talks about some kinds of capabilities of a person's rational self. So, negative liberty is about being left alone whereas positive liberty is about the freedom of the individual to develop his or her personality. So, if a person is left alone to do whatever he wants to do, at that point of time, we can say that the person is having negative liberty. Whereas in positive liberty, the person has the freedom to develop his or her personality. So, for positive liberty, the state should create enabling conditions for capacity enhancement, moral development, and self realization. So, positive liberty wants states interference so that it can enable the condition for the capacity enhancement, moral development, and self realization. So, early liberalism is associated with the philosophy of individualism. The belief was that the fight was against orthodoxy, ignorance, and feudalism and could be taken forward by individual initiative. It was based on the assumption of an autonomous and rational individual. It argued for the absence of restraints on individual freedom. So, all these things are the points which talks about liberty. So, at the political level, it was argued for restraint on arbitrary state authority. So, the advocates of liberty and mainly negative liberty, they talks about the restraint on arbitrary state authority and their involvement in a person's personal life. So, in economic aspects, negative liberty implied the philosophy of laissez-faire. So, in contrast to negative liberty, positive liberty associates liberty with society, socio-economic conditions, rights, equality, and justice. According to T.H. Green, he opined that freedom is not absence of restraint, but the positive power of doing and enjoying something worth doing, or enjoying and that too something which we do or enjoy in common with others. So, this is the definition that T.H. Green provides. He is a positive liberty supporter. So let's come to J.S. Mill on liberty. John Stuart Mill's essay on liberty, 1859, is regarded as a landmark publication in the discussions of political freedom. So this is a very important part. So to Mill, the development of the individual is possible without liberty and goes on to argue that it is necessary for the happiness of the society as well. So according to Mill, the development of individual is impossible without liberty. So, for a person to develop his personality and to grow as a human being, he needs liberty. So, Mill believes that restraint is an evil and the individual should be left to oneself. So, there must not be any kind of restraints or hindrances. So, Mill's argument of liberty can be classified into two categories: freedom of thought and expression and freedom of action. So, Mill believed that clash of views facilitated by the freedom of expressions provides the intellectual impetus for thought, discussion, and progress. So, for him, this clash is positive. He was convinced that without such freedom, society will be dominated by dogma. So, there must be the freedom of expression, which will be providing intellectual inputs and from thoughts, discussions, and progress. Mill proposed that individuals should enjoy the greatest possible realm of freedom, but also recognize that unrestrained liberty may create probability of oppression and result in tyrannical behavior. So he divides all human actions into two categories, namely self-regarding actions and other regarding actions. So according to self-regarding action, these are those it concerns with individual performing them, and there should not be any kind of intervention in this realm, and interference with the individual's liberty of action is justified only to prevent him from harming others. So if a person is harming others, in that case, one can interfere in that person's liberty. So, in effect, the harm principle ensures individuals' duty towards the society. So, Mill provides absolute liberty in case of freedom of speech and expression. At the same time, he is also supporting certain limitations on the actions taken by the individual to maintain order in society. And from here comes the concept of censorship. So, the origin of the term censorship can be traced to the office of censor established in Rome in 443 BC. So, censorship is not new, it is a very old concept. And in Rome, it was used to regulate morals and ritually purifying the people. So from this office derives the modern use of the term censorship to denote the practice of examining, restricting and prohibiting public acts, expressions of opinions and artistic performance. So in today's time, censorship generally regarded as a relic of an unenlightened and much more oppressive age. So censorship is regarding something which oppresses a person's creative ideas. So, the suppression of control of ideas, public communication, and information circulated within a society is termed as censorship. So, censorship is a tool which is used either by the state or society for the maintenance of power achieved through manipulation of the cultural sphere. So, this is very important to understand. The cultural realm plays an important role in deciding what is acceptable in society, as cultural hegemony declares some words or acts to be decent and others indecent and goes on to control its meaning and thought. So, apart from culture, there are various sources of censorship as well, like religion, dictatorship, and the market. So, the Glorious Revolution and the French Revolution marked a new era in the history as people started demanding ideals like liberty, equality, and role in decision-making process. So, according to Hitler and Mussolini, they engineered a language to have control over the minds of the people and curbed all forms of expressions which might question their authority and legitimacy. So, they have some kinds of censorship on people. The Soviet Union during the period of Stalin was severely criticized for using censorship over art, literature, movies, and other medium of communication. So, language under dictators didn't just remain a medium of expression. Rather, the state used it to define phrases of approbation and disapproval, which had to be accepted by all. So, there is also relationship between liberty and censorship. The existence of a free society depends upon communication among various groups, free flow of information, and space for continuous debate and criticism, and it allows the horizon of knowledge to expand and reinvent the existing truth. In a democracy, the citizens' consent is indispensable to grant legitimacy to the government's action, which is possible only with the existence of active liberty structured on free speech and expression. So, the state, over a period of time, through various mechanisms of censorship, tries to halt that free flow of communication. So, censorship has an inherent tendency to marginalize the truth and the pursuit of truth and to put conformity in their place. So, the concept of censorship has been perceived in a different manner by Herbert Marcuse in his book Repressive Tolerance. So, he argued that lack of censorship laws in a state doesn't necessarily guarantee the worthwhile exercise of free will of individuals. He further states that in a society where the general population has been indoctrinated and manipulated by those who control the media, free speech may simply serve the interest of the powerful elite. So he has a different kind of idea about censorship. So he focuses on the cultural realm of the power, control, and its influence over free will of the people. So the stare repression theory of Louis Althusser is equally important to understand. He explains that the ideological apparatus belongs to the private domain of society like family, education, religion, media, etc., constructs dominant ideology of society through control over information. So, thus, censorship is not carried out by individual or classes, but it's a process carried unconsciously by the private domain itself in which it is inherent. So, according to Althusser, it is controlled by private domain. So thus it can be concluded that censorship is not always used directly by the state to maintain its power, but at times it can be used through culture, society, media, religion, education, etc. to create a dominant ideology. So, language and speech have always been a very powerful medium, and at times they may be used to incite violence or hurt the sentiments of the people. So, Richard Delgado, in his Words That Wound, which was published in 1993, argued that racist speech leaves a deep psychological wound on its victims, leading to self-hatred, humiliation, and isolation. According to Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon, they argued that sexually oriented speech should be regulated because it subordinates women and not only provides foundation for it but is also violent against women. So this is all about our 2 units today. I finish our today's session with this. In this session, we have talked about democracy and economic growth, how democracy and economic growth are either compatible, and some scholars have argued that they are not compatible. So we talked about this. In part 12, unit 12, we talked about liberty and censorship, where we can see liberty is freedom, whereas censorship restricts ourselves. So this is all about today's lecture. Thank you.